You were built to dissolve, not into dust, not into earth, but into the needs of others. Every smile you forced when your chest was hollow, every yes that tasted like ash in your mouth, every time you swallowed your rage to keep the peace. You were not learning kindness. You were learning erasure. And the cruelest part is that your biology rewarded you for it. Your brain released oxytocin when you complied, dopamine when you were praised for being easy, for being small, for being convenient. Evolution did not design you to be whole. It designed you to be useful, to fit into the social organism like a cell that never questions the body it serves. But here is what they never told you. The body does not love its cells. It uses them. And when you are no longer useful, when your boundaries finally emerge like bones through starving skin, the body rejects you. Suddenly, you are selfish. Suddenly, you are difficult. Suddenly, the people who fed on your compliance look at you like you have betrayed some sacred contract you never remember signing. And maybe you did sign it. Maybe it was signed for you when you were too young to read the terms. When your mother's exhaustion became your responsibility. When your father's silence became the template for love. When you learned that your value was measured not by what you felt, but by how little you made others feel uncomfortable with your feeling. This is not psychology. This is biology wearing the mask of morality. Your nervous system was sculpted in the kiln of attachment. Mirror neurons firing. Learning to read every micro-expression on your caretaker's face. Because in the ancestral environment, misreading that face could mean abandonment. And abandonment meant death. So you became a satellite, orbiting the emotional gravity of everyone but yourself. You learned their needs before you learned your own. You learned their language before you found your voice. And your brain, that 3-pound universe of electrical storms and chemical seas, encoded this as survival. It told you that your existence was conditional, that love was something you earned through the systematic abandonment of self. Do you ever feel like you were raised to be a ghost in your own life? Right, I felt it too, if you understand. The tragedy is not that this happened. The tragedy is that it worked. You survived. You became what they needed you to become. And your reward was a life spent watching yourself from a distance, like a stranger at a window, wondering who that person is behind the glass, and why they never seem to want anything for themselves. Neuroscience calls this a fragmented sense of self. Philosophy calls it alienation. But both are just elaborate names for the same ancient wound. The knowledge that you exist, but you do not live. That you are here, but you are not home. And the question that burns beneath your ribs at 3 in the morning is whether you ever had a choice, or whether your personality was always just the scar tissue that formed over the needs of others. Here is what the research shows. Children who grow up in environments where their emotional expression is punished or ignored develop what psychologists call a fawn response. Not fight, not flight, not freeze. Fawn. The nervous system learns that survival depends on making yourself palatable, on reading the room, on becoming whatever shape the room requires. Your amygdala, that ancient alarm system buried deep in your brain, stops firing warnings about danger to you and starts firing warnings about your potential to cause discomfort in others. You become your own warden, your own surveillance system, policing every impulse, every desire, every flicker of selfhood before it can disturb the fragile peace you have been taught to maintain. And this is where biology becomes philosophy, because what you are experiencing is not weakness. It is not failure. It is the inevitable outcome of a brain that evolved to connect, forced to survive in relationships where connection required disappearance. Your consciousness, that strange recursive loop of awareness watching awareness, became a weapon turned inward. You learned to observe yourself the way a predator observes prey. Always alert, always editing, always asking, is this version of me acceptable? Is this one safe? Can I exist like this without being too much, without being a burden, without taking up space that belongs to someone else? But space does not belong to anyone else. That is the lie, the original lie, the one that was planted in you before you had words to question it. You are not occupying borrowed space. You are not a guest in your own existence. The universe does not ask permission to expand, and neither should you. Yet here you are, a biological miracle, a conscious arrangement of stardust and time, convinced that your most natural state is apologizing for existing. The human brain is the most complex structure we have ever encountered in the cosmos. 86 billion neurons, trillions of synaptic connections, an electrochemical symphony that somehow generates the experience of being you. And you have spent that entire magnificent architecture learning to betray itself, learning to prioritize the comfort of others over the integrity of your own nervous system. This is what happens when social animals develop self-awareness. We do not just experience pain. We experience the pain of watching ourselves experience pain and feeling guilty about it. We do not just feel anger. We feel anger at our anger, shame at our needs, fear of our own boundaries. Consciousness turned inward becomes a hall of mirrors. And somewhere in that infinite reflection, you lost the original face, the one you had before you learned to perform, before you learned that love was a transaction and you were always in debt. And the people who raised you this way, they were not villains. That is the unbearable part. They were just trying to survive the same evolutionary trap. They were raised by people who were raised by people who learned that the world is hostile and the only way to move through it is to make yourself small, useful, convenient. Trauma is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is a mother who never learned to want things for herself, teaching her daughter that wanting is dangerous. Sometimes it is a father who swallowed his pain, teaching his son that feeling is weakness. The pattern repeats. The wound passes down, and each generation believes they are protecting the next by teaching them to disappear. But disappearance is not safety. It is a slow suffocation, a life spent in a cage you built with your own hands. And the worst part is that the door was never locked. You could have left at any time. But leaving means facing the terror that kept you there. The terror that if you stop being useful, stop being easy, stop being the version of yourself that everyone else needs, you will be alone. And maybe you will be. Maybe the people who loved your performance will not love your presence. Maybe they will call you selfish when you finally stop self-abandoning. Maybe they will mourn the version of you that never said no, that never asked for anything, that never disturbed their comfort with the inconvenience of your humanity. Let them mourn. That version of you was never real anyway. It was a survival strategy dressed up as a personality. And survival strategies are not meant to last forever. They're meant to get you through the fire. But you are not in the fire anymore. You are standing in the ashes, holding a mask you wore so long you forgot it was not your face. The philosophical question at the heart of this is whether the self even exists, or whether we are just the sum of our adaptations, our responses, our learned performances. And maybe that is true. Maybe there is no essential you waiting to be discovered beneath the layers of conditioning. Maybe you are nothing more than a process, a verb disguised as a noun, a continuous act of becoming shaped by every encounter, every wound, every moment you chose someone else's comfort over your own integrity. But if that is true, if you are not a fixed thing but a living improvisation, then you can choose what shape that improvisation takes. You can stop performing the old script. You can stop letting the ghosts of your childhood direct the story of your adulthood. You can feel the weight of every unspoken need, every swallowed boundary, every time you betrayed yourself to keep the peace. And you can decide that the peace was never worth the cost. This is not about becoming selfish. This is about becoming whole, about recognizing that you are not a supporting character in everyone else's narrative. You are the protagonist of your own. And every moment you spend trying to keep everyone else happy at the expense of yourself is a moment you are choosing someone else's life over your own. Biology gave you a nervous system that can feel pain so you would know when something is wrong. Philosophy gave you consciousness so you could question whether the wrong thing is the world or your response to it. And the answer, the one that sits like a stone in your throat, is both. The world is cruel, and your response was to internalize that cruelty, to become the enforcer of your own smallness. But cruelty is not destiny. Conditioning is not identity. And the fact that you were raised to disappear does not mean you have to spend the rest of your life as a ghost. If you see beauty in the darkness of existence, you belong here. Subscribe, and let's keep walking through the shadows together.